So the first hypothesis on urban poverty is actually part of a much larger debate about the changing nature of the U.S. economy in the late 20th century. In summary, it asserts that inner-city poverty is a product of the loss of employment opportunities that resulted from profound structural changes in the larger economy. The key elements of that change are threefold. First, transformation in the technology and organization of manufacturing. Second, the relative growth of the service sector. And third, the increasing role of international competition. Major shifts in the economy occurred during the 1970s. Wage growth lagged, and the economy suffered multiple shocks from energy prices and rapid inflation. The surge of births in the post-war baby boom meant that the labor force grew rapidly about this time, while women were entering the labor force in numbers at a high rate also in the 1970s. Understand, too, that in the 1960s, total manufacturing employment in older cities, such as New York and Philadelphia, had begun to fall, and this decline accelerated in the 1970s. The development of the suburbs and freeways also provided the labor force. People could now get from suburbia easier to the industrial fringes of the cities because transportation and communication facilitated movement. Better freeways and bridges allowed more people to commute from the suburbs into the cities. Inner-city residents, a large proportion of which were minorities, were segregated and were now cut off from employment. Those few remaining manufacturing and construction jobs were subject to intense competition in the labor market. Then eventually, many of these jobs also would be eliminated by technology. The ability to do social bargaining between labor and capital also declined in some areas, and then eventually it started to disappear in some sectors of the labor market. Unionization also dramatically declined. At the same time, the growth in real wages was also declining. There emerged in society in general, but especially in the cities, growing inequality in income distribution, combined with very high levels of unemployment, welfare dependency, and labor market detachment among the very poor. Globalization emerges in the 1970s also, and grows and starts to dominate the manufacturing sector of the economy, and makes cheap labor locations around the world more accessible. So this then amplifies the competitive disadvantage of urban locations in the United States. What manufacturing and industrial jobs that were located now on the fringes of the cities, these jobs started to decline even more due to the globalization in the 1970s and its steady increase for the next several decades. So what do I mean by human capital? It's the level of capability embedded in the individual worker, their level of productivities as resulting from education and training, from skills developed through experience, and from understanding that comes with age, all interacting with what might be called innate potential. Human capital can be expressed in three elements: education, job skills, and work experience, in addition to an individual's innate ability. For the most part, these elements are defined as the level of educational attainment, occupation, and work history as indicators of skills, and age or years in the labor market, which then translates to skills and experience. Thus, other things being equal, younger, less educated populations would be expected to find employment in low-skill occupations and to receive lower wages and incomes. So of these various factors, inner cities demonstrate significantly lower levels on all fronts. Populations of the segregated ghetto areas are clearly worse off in each respect than the populations of the inner cities as a whole. For instance, looking at the 100 largest central cities in 1990, 28% of the total population aged 25 years and above had less than a high school education, while 53% of the population in extreme poverty areas of the central cities had not completed high school. Let's now talk about what's called skills mismatch. This refers to the disparity in educational level between city jobs and minority city residents. This is the idea that residents of the area do not have the educational attainment to fill the local labor market. This is what's called skills mismatch. In the 1980s, another phenomenon occurred. The overall premium of higher education increased sharply, although the required skills were often not used on the job. So this then translates to college-educated labor moving into jobs formerly occupied by those with only a high school education, and so forth down the line. Thus, to get a job that formerly required a high school degree, one had to have a college degree. Understand, too, that while this human capital aspect occurs in minority populations in general, the effects are likely to be worse among the inner-city population. Hypothesis number 3, employment discrimination and the denial of opportunity, considers how discrimination plays an indirect role in the causing of poverty because it creates segregation, because it lowers wages for women, and lower wages for women then increase the problems and economic struggles in female-headed households. And discrimination can also result in public policies, such as affirmative action, that create then a backlash against minorities. Discrimination fosters earning disparities in part by increasing occupational segregation. In general, the higher the percentage of minorities or females in an occupation, the less the occupation is paid. And the more minorities or women are crowded into certain occupations, the more wages drop. Also, researchers have documented a negative view of inner-city African American workers, particularly males, among both white and African American employers. Pair-tested studies in which minority job applicants were paired with white applicants with similar backgrounds and trained to be as similar as possible in behavior have established employment discrimination, showing that minorities, particularly African Americans and foreign-sounding Latinos, were less likely to receive job interviews and offers.